I want you to imagine Moshe. Moshe is a fine balabas. He has quite a number of kids in yeshiva, learns the Daf Yomi. He's a fine, regular Jew. And as a matter of fact, he's doing very well. He has a business and it's quite successful. And year after year, things grow, things expand. And after a while, he's quite wealthy, doing phenomenally well. And he's glad to share his wealth, gives plenty of tzedakah, supports the yeshivas in the best way he can. And he's what we'd call a fine balabas. Well, as things turn out, after a while, his business starts going into a negative cycle. And before you know it, sales are down and his payables are up. And one thing turns to another until one Friday, late afternoon, he realizes it's over. He's bankrupt. There's nothing left. His business is finished, done with. 20 years of hard work, 20 years of extraordinary devotion, and it's all gone. He goes home beyond distraught. He makes Kiddush Friday night. He's barely able to talk at the Shabbos table. He goes to shul Shabbos morning, but his mind is just somewhere else altogether. What's he going to do? What's the future? He is totally distraught. Hard to know why, but during Musaf, he walks out, finds himself somewhere in a park near the shul, and he bums a cigarette off another fellow there, and he smokes a cigarette on Shabbos. Okay, very unfortunate, very rough day. What's the halacha? So it doesn't take much thought to realize that he is violated a Torah principle. He's chayiv misa. If there was a Sanhedrin around, if he got warnings from Edom, he would be put to death. Now, I'd like to ask a very simple question. He's a good guy under very, very rough circumstances. Why in the world would the Torah say he's lost his lease on life? Every punishment in the Torah is because what you've done merits that amount of punishment. But what he did doesn't merit death. He's a good guy going through a rough spot. Hashem is more merciful than anyone we can imagine or envision. Take that mercy, multiply it 10,000 times. We can't begin to envision or imagine the love, the kindliness, the mercy that Hashem has in any one of his creations. Why would Hashem write in the Torah that the punishment that's appropriate for that person is death? It sure doesn't seem that the punishment fits the crime. And when you come across a halacha like that, and it's not one but many, you begin to realize that there's something going on that doesn't really fit my paradigm. The way I view the world, the way I view actions, doesn't quite seem to fit with the way the Torah views it. And I'd like to see if we can understand a little bit better the Torah's paradigm and understand why, in fact, the Torah feels that that's appropriate for that person at that time. And to do that, let me share with you a chazal that's a very eye-opening and powerful chazal. Chazal tell us that when Hashem created Adam Rishon, he brought Adam Rishon to Gan Eden, and Hashem said, look at this beauty. Look at this magnificent. Everything that I've created, everything in the world was created for you and for you alone. Pay careful attention that you don't destroy my world. I'd like to ask you a very obvious question on this medrash. What in the world could one man do to destroy an entire world? The Mesil Shem brings this in his introduction, the first parak, as a major concept, that the world is dependent on man. And in fact, when man, Adam in this case, didn't use the world appropriately, he destroyed the world. What in the world can one man do to destroy an entire world? He doesn't have an axe big enough. He can't light a forest fire to all the trees on the planet. What does this chazal mean? And to understand this, we have to do something that we very rarely do, and that is try to understand the I, try to understand what makes me tick, what makes me, the human being, do what I do. Because while we spend a lot of time trying to understand many things, we spend very little time, unfortunately, trying to understand ourselves. And one of the most unusual things about I is that I am very, very complex. Sometimes I'm a really nice guy. And sometimes, well, not really so nice. Sometimes I'm calm, cool, and collected. And sometimes I lose it. And if you ever study yourself, and if you ever really, really sort of step outside yourself and watch, you may be astonished. You may do things that you just don't understand. You may say things that you can't believe you said. If you've ever lost your temper, you may have found yourself the next morning saying, what happened to me? How could I have said those words? How could I have done that? And if you're really careful and you really pay attention to I and how I conduct myself, you'll find that I'm constantly being hijacked. One time it'll be jealousy, one time it'll be anger, another time it'll be desire. But when those emotions, feelings, sensations take over, I become a different person. Suddenly I think differently. Suddenly I feel differently. Suddenly I look at things differently. And it's as if I'm no longer the same person. And again, the proof in the pudding is the next morning, a day later, when I come back to my senses and I say, but I would never have done that. I never would have said that. Why did I do it? And I believe one of the most important lines that you could probably ever train your tongue to say is, the human being is a very strange person, and I too am a human being. Because if you train your tongue to say those words, you could watch other people and see them do very, very strange things. Watch them get completely, totally, emotionally embroiled. Watch them become different human beings and only later sort of come back. And then you say to yourself, that's strange. And if you train your tongue then to say the words, and I too am a human being, you might just find that you do that exact thing. And the question is why? And the reason is because Hashem created the human being in a very, very particular manner, and we are extraordinarily complex. The simple part of I am made up of a nefesh bahami and a nefesh sichli, as we've discussed already. But that's really the simple part of me. You see, the simple part of me is made up of various parts. The way that Derech Hashem explains it, the conscious thinking I has dimyon, imagination. I have zikaron, memory. I have seichel, intelligence. And I have rotzon, I have will. Those are all parts of the I who I'm speaking to you. Of course, there's a parallel part. There's a nefesh bahami. In the nefesh bahami, as we've discussed, there are all of the animals' desires, all of the instincts necessary to keep the human being alive, Hashem put into the nefesh bahami. And the I whom speaking to you, and comprised of two vastly different parts, one very intelligent, and one completely driven by desires, instincts, passions. And if you'd like to fundamentally understand I have a mashal that I think is very important. If you study Siamese twin, co-joined twins, you'll find it's a very, very interesting phenomenon. Two human beings, two personalities, but one body. What happens is, in the embryonic state, one egg will become implanted with two sperm, and that egg basically becomes one co-joined human being. And today, there's technology that allows these Siamese twins, these co-joined twins, actually to live productive lives. And there's even examples. There's one whose name's Abby and Brittany Hensel, and they are now young women. And the most astonishing thing is you could see two heads, two arms, two legs. But they're clearly two distinct people with different personalities, different interests, and yet they're co-joined and they live together. And what's amazing about this particular group, Abby and Brittany Hensel, is that they're very, very productive, very successful. They went to high school, they went to college, and they now actually teach. They took their driving test. Now, very interestingly, one of the twins controls one side of the body, the other controls the other. So I don't know who made this decision, but someone decided that they have to take the driving test twice. Both twins has to take it. But they do live together, walk together, are able to manage everything in their life together, including driving, despite the fact that there are two people there. As a matter of fact, when they teach, which is what they now do, one of them teaches and the other one observes. Meaning when they went to college, they both took education courses, they both took the tests. And now that they're in the classroom, one actually lectures, teaches, and the other one observes. And obviously, kids don't get away with much in that classroom. But here's the point. They're two distinct people. Now let's imagine for a minute you have co-joined twins. And everything they do together peacefully and amicably. They're able to walk and live and do everything, etc. But one of them likes to drink and the other one doesn't. Well, here's the problem. They share one bloodstream. So if this twin decides to get drunk, well, guess what? The other one gets drunk as well. And what that means in plain, simple language is they're in this together. And unless the other twin who doesn't like to drink grabs the bottle before the first twin actually consumes that alcohol, they're both going to be drunk. And if you like to fundamentally understand yourself, that is I. You see, there's a part of me that's cool, rational, well thought out. And there's a part of me that's very different. And if I let that other part of me get drunk, now that drunkenness could be with laziness, it could be with anger, it could be with jealousy. But when it gets drunk with those feelings, I share the same body. I share the same bloodstream. So when it gets angry, I see red. I'm furious because it's one body. And if you like to fundamentally understand yourself, you have to recognize that on a regular basis, I get hijacked. And the only way I can protect myself is if I slap the behemoth's hand before he takes that bottle and puts it to his lips. Before he gets into that angry state, if I calmly talk myself out of it. Before the jealousy overwhelms me, if I calmly walk away. But you have to recognize that there are two parts to me, and if that other part takes that bottle to my lips, I get drunk, and in that state, I feel differently, think differently, am different than I was until the alcohol kind of leaves my system, until the drunken state of anger or jealousy or desire or passion, whatever it may be, leaves, and then I come back to seeing things in a rational, cool sense. And that is I, and that is I whom speaking to you. However, what's interesting to note is that's but half of the equation. The Derech Hashem explains that that's all within what's known as the neshama tachtona, all within the regular conscious I that we're aware of. However, he explains, there's a whole other dimension to I that has nothing to do with any of these parts. And that's what he calls the neshama elyona, the upper part, oftentimes called just neshama by Chazal, although that expression refers to different things. But the point is there is an upper soul to man that has nothing to do with anything that I just described. And that upper soul has different parts to it. There's a nefesh, a ruach, a neshama, a chaya, a yechidah, different components. And he says, if you'd like to sort of watch the complexity of the human, just study a phenomena that we always engage in, but rarely think about. What happens when you go to sleep? Right? Imagine you're in the dorm room, and your roommate is sleeping. What happened? Where is he? Where did he go? Now, his body is there, but he's not. In the good old days, the way you killed a king, you waited till the brute was sound asleep, and then you slit his throat. Because the king might have been a terror while he was awake, but when he was sleeping, he wasn't. But what do you mean he wasn't there? What happened to him? Where did he go? And the Derech Hashem explains that almost all of the parts of the Neshama Elyona, and even many of the parts of the Neshama Tachtona, leave the body and are allowed to go into the upper worlds, and they're allowed to engage with different forces in the upper worlds. As a matter of fact, he explains that's what dreams are. There are many times when Hashem will allow a person to see something. My Neshama Elyona goes to the upper world, it gets to converse with different malachim, different forces, and there are times when Hashem wants to deliver a message to the person, and my Neshama Elyona will see something with absolute clarity, something that's going to happen to me. But here's the problem. While my body is sound asleep in bed, the only part that's functioning then is dimyon, is imagination. So when my Neshama Elyona goes into the upper worlds, sees something, a vision, what's going to happen to me, it then communicates through the part of the brain which is alive then, which is dimyon, imagination, and things get muddled and confused. And Chazal tell us there's no dream that doesn't contain some things that are irrelevant or foolish. Most dreams are in fact that, just things that have no meaning whatsoever, just wild imaginations, just things that I thought about during the day that get replayed or get embellished or become more vivid. But every once in a while, there are dreams that have much more meaning. And that's why Chazal took it very seriously. If you would see a dream regularly, time after time, and it was very clear and it involved another person or maybe yourself, Chazal took it very seriously. And again, the Derech Hashem explains why. Because when the upper part of my neshama goes up to Shemayim, it often is allowed to converse, engage, speak to, and have conversations with upper world forces. And it might well have seen something that is considered, almost prophetic. Again, because I have to interpret it through my thick brain, through my thick, heavy consciousness, and through imagination, it distorts it, and it's hard to really know what it means. But the bottom line is something really happened. Another concept we know on Shabbos is something called a neshama yesera, an extra neshama. Now, I don't know many people who walk around, whoa, Shabbos, I have my neshama yesera. We don't feel it. So what is this neshama yesera? And again, the Ramchal explains that the neshama yesera is another dimension to my neshama. And when you understand what the neshama elyona does, why Hashem created it, you'll understand what a neshama yesera is. One of the functions of my upper neshama, the neshama elyona, is to guide me, to direct me, to sort of coax me and guide me to doing the right things. If you'd like to know what it's like, imagine you've just eaten a large meal and you're clearly satisfied. You definitely aren't hungry. And then maybe an hour later, you find yourself at the refrigerator sort of grazing. Now you're clearly not lacking nourishment. You're really still stuffed from the large meal you had an hour ago. So what are you doing? So the answer is you're sort of kind of hungry, I think. This sort of annoying sense of I want to eat. That's a good mashal to what the neshama does to me. The neshama is a part of me. A neshama elyona, it's an upper neshama. It's created to guide me. It's not allowed to speak directly to me because that would take away free will. But it's allowed to sort of coax, to sort of like pull me in a direction. To say, come on, let's do this. Come on, why don't we do that? Come on, let's. And when you feel that sort of tugging on your soul, and that sort of pulling you, oftentimes that's your neshama trying to direct you. And one of the main jobs of the neshama is to guide you. On Shabbos we have a neshama yesera. That means it's given extra power, extra pull. You'll be able to think things on Shabbos that you normally couldn't think. You'll have an extra clarity. You'll have more of an understanding because there's more energy infused. But again, it's not in the conscious eye. And it's not in my nefesh or neshama that I normally think about, not in what we'll call now the nefesh tachton, the lower part of my neshama. It's all in the upper part, the part that I don't identify with, the part that I really don't see. And the first job of the neshama, Elyona, is to guide me, direct me to do everything that's right, good, and proper. However, there's a whole other function of the neshama Elyona that has nothing to do with guiding me. And to understand what that is, let's focus on a chazal. Chazal say that when Hashem said the words, Nase Odam B'Tzalminu Kidmusenu, let us make man in our image. The Gemara tells us that actually that was a conversation. Hashem said to the Malachi Asharis, let us create man. And the Malachi Asharis said, what is the nature of this man? And Hashem described his nature. And the Malachi Asharis said, no, don't do it. So then Hashem destroyed that group of malachim. Then Hashem created another group of malachim and said, let us create Adam. Tell us the nature of this man you want to create. Hashem described the nature, and this second group said, no, don't do it. Hashem destroyed that group. Then Hashem created a third group of Malach Asharis. Let us create man. Now Malach Asharis is the highest level of malachim. They're brilliant, they understand. And they also understood what happened before, and his third group said, okay, Hashem, obviously you want to do it. You already destroyed two groups of malachim. Go ahead, do it. Now here's the question. Why in the world would malachim not want Hashem to create man? The purpose of creation is man. And the reason why Hashem made the whole world is man. Why would the highest level of malach say, don't do it? And the Derech Hashem explains this. The Shev Shmaitz is even more clear when he says that because the reason of creation was man, that's exactly why the Malachim didn't want Hashem to create man. You see, when Hashem created the entire world from man, it wasn't just that Hashem made a world and Hashem made man. Hashem made the entire world from man in a way that man can buy his world to come to such an amazing extent. Because the entire world is dependent on man. How man uses it will determine the holiness or the opposite of the world. When Hashem created the world, Hashem created in a state of flex, that the way man uses that world will determine what it is, what it becomes, and what it will be. But the world itself was created in a manner that man would use it, and the manner in which he would use it would shape it into what it would be. And that is why the Malachim were very, very fearful of allowing man to be created. Because if you put this man into the middle of Gan Eden, and he uses the world appropriately and properly, the world becomes elevated, it becomes pure, it becomes holy, and everything in creation benefits from that. But what if man doesn't? What if man doesn't obey? What if man uses the world inappropriately? Then it's not just that he's ruining himself, not just that he's damaging his neshama, the world itself that he's using, or in this case misusing, becomes damaged, becomes sullied, and eventually could be destroyed. The reason why the Malachim didn't want man to be created was because it's way too risky. Because the world itself is based on man, dependent on man, and guess what? If man doesn't do what he's supposed to do, the entire world could be destroyed. And as a matter of fact, that's what happened when Adam Arishon ate from the Eitz Hadas. One man, one sin, and basically the world was supposed to end at that moment. Adam Arishon was so makalkel, so ruined the world, that effectively Hashem could no longer run the world as Hashem wanted to. And the Derech Hashem explains that because of that one act, the world had to run in a vastly different manner, because everything in creation that was created for man was dependent on man, And because of that, if man misused it, well, it's all over. And this concept might be a little bit difficult for us to understand. But the concept is that when Hashem said, let us make man in our image, what Hashem was saying is, I am the creator of the heavens and the earth. Everything that exists because Hashem keeps it in existence. And when Hashem said, let us create a man in the image of Hashem, what Hashem was saying, let us make a little creator. Let us make a man who is responsible for the maintenance of existence. Just like Hashem says, just like I am the one who created and maintains the world, let's make man in my image, meaning to say, make man as a creator, a maintainer of worlds. Now, how does man make a world? Well, he can if Hashem creates everything in physicality, everything in the spiritual world, dependent on man. Then if man uses it appropriately and properly, it becomes elevated. He becomes the one who infuses strength, energy into matter, into existence. And with that, he's a little creator. And if he does that for eternity, he is credited with that. And that's his world to come. And it's astonishing. However, it's a bit risky. Because when you create a man with free will, well, it could go this way and it could go that way. Because that's what free will means. But free will means it can go this way and it can go that way. And man is in the position to decide. Well, the problem is if man decides the wrong way, well, guess what? And the Derech Hashem explains that if you'd like to understand the second part, the second role of Neshama Elyona, it has nothing to do with me directly. And it has nothing to do with guiding me. The other function of the Neshama Elyona is to connect me to the upper worlds. There is a part of me, this Neshama Elyona, that is directly tied in, directly connected to the upper worlds, so that when I use this world appropriately, it's not just that I change, and not just that the world change, but entire upper worlds become electrified, become empowered, become much more elevated. And that connection of my Neshama Elyona to the upper worlds was given to me as a human being so that for eternity I could have what I created. If I use my time appropriately, I use my energies properly, then it's not just me that I change, and not just even the physical world and its underpinnings, but I change upper worlds to an extent that's hard to imagine or envision. And if you'd like a mushal to sort of bridge the gap a little bit, because it's very difficult for us to really relate to this, I'll give you what I consider a very good mushal. How do you make electricity? So almost all electricity is made with a turbine. If you can imagine copper wire, much copper wire, a magnet inside the copper wire. When you spin the magnet, the copper wire, the electrons in the copper wire spin around. Electricity actually is the movement of those electrons, the energy of those electrons spinning around is electricity. So you have to get the magnet to move around. When the magnet moves around, it causes the electrons in the copper wire. Copper conducts electricity well. Those electrons move around. That is how you make electricity. So the bottom line is, to make electricity, to make energy, you need energy. And that's one of the great challenges of modern man. You need energy to make this energy form called electricity. So how do you do that? So oftentimes you burn fossil fuels, maybe you burn different coals, sometimes you tap into wind, maybe even using sunlight. There are various different sources of the energy needed to turn the turbines to create energy, to create electricity. Well, here's the problem. Almost all of them are very, very messy. They create tremendous amounts of emissions and pollutions. And now, for the past 40, 50 years, mankind has been searching for a cleaner form of energy, hence trying to tap into things like wind and water and etc. to find a cleaner energy source to conduct electricity. Okay, well, it happens to be that Texas State University came on to a brilliant idea. They took 30 elliptical machines and they hooked them up as generators. I mean, if a man is on an elliptical machine, he's moving the pedals. that's a way of turning the turbine, which would then turn the magnet, which if there are copper wires surrounding, it can move the electrons. So an elliptical machine can be an energy source to generate electricity. And they spent $20,000 to hook up 30 elliptical machines to now be a clean source of generating energy. Well, here's a little problem. A man on a elliptical machine for 1 hour will produce 100 watts of energy in that hour, which is about as much energy as needed to light up one light bulb. Meaning to say, if all of those 30 elliptical machines were being used all day, every day, it would take 57 years to create enough energy to pay for the cost of the elliptical machines, let alone generate enough energy to actually do something significant. Because little man, while he moves those pedals, can generate but a little bit of electricity. And even if you find efficient manners, he's not going to get very far, because one light bulb is not what you and I use in the course of a day, a week, or a month. As a matter of fact, if you were trying to generate electricity on this elliptical machine to provide the needs of your household, you would find yourself in very, very serious trouble, because you have dishwashers and refrigerators and air conditioners. Forget about it. Okay. Now here's an interesting point. I live in Muncie, New York. Not too far from Muncie, New York is Indian Point Energy Center. It's a nuclear reactor, actually 2 nuclear reactors that are used to produce electricity. But would you like to know how much electricity these 2 nuclear reactors produce? They produce enough energy to supply the electrical supply of 25% of New York City and Westchester. 2 million homes are provided with full electricity, as well as tens of thousands of businesses, as well as transportation, as well as municipal systems, because each generator alone generates 1,000 megawatts, or 1,000 million watts, or in plain language, 100 million times more than our man on the elliptical machine. So clearly, our man on the elliptical machine is not generating much energy. Our nuclear reactor sure is. But I want you to imagine for a minute the following. You know, this Indian Point nuclear reactor requires something to sort of keep things running, and something to sort of make the switches do what they're supposed to do. So imagine that we had a man on an elliptical machine, and this elliptical machine was tied to a nuclear reactor. And as long as he moved the elliptical machine, it provided the energy to keep the nuclear reactor doing what it should do. What would happen would be our man with his tiny little output would then be magnified 100 million times, and he'd be producing energy to light up cities. That's a mashal to understand what Hashem did when Hashem created us. Hashem put us into this physical world that's thick, that's corporeal, and what we do here is very sluggish and very, very small. But we're hooked up to an upper world. And when I'm on my little elliptical machine over here and I'm doing my little things, it's powering upper worlds, lighting up upper worlds, creating legions of malachim, leagues and leagues, tens of thousands of malachim created. Because I'm doing very small actions, but when I do them the way the Torah told me to do them, they're hooked up to these nuclear reactors above. My neshama Elyona lights up the upper world, and the results are phenomenal and miles above anything that I could ever imagine, anything that I could ever envision. However, here's the problem. You see, when my neshama is hooked up to the upper world, and I do the right thing, I'm churning out powerful megawatts of energy, and I'm lighting up the world. And that's wonderful. Because what happens is the world itself becomes more holy. And my neshama in turn is greatly impacted. So when I do what I'm supposed to here, my neshama Elyona is in the upper world lighting up the world. Everyone in creation benefits from it, because the whole world is now gaining in that power, my neshama as well is influenced by it, and my neshama is now able to influence me to do more, and I grow and I accomplish, and things are wonderful. However, what happens if I don't do the right thing? So just like my neshama Elyona can empower the upper world and create tremendous changes, so too if I do the opposite. In the world, there is something known as a black hole. It's very difficult for us to imagine what a black hole is because nothing escapes it. It's basically a star that has imploded, and the gravitational force is so powerful that nothing escapes. But when I say nothing, that means no light, maybe even not time, and it creates such a powerful gravitational force that it's hard to imagine. Because a star that might have been so large that we can't even come up with numbers, a medium-sized star, our local sun, is 865,000 miles in diameter. If it were to collapse, it would be about the size of a golf ball. If it became a black hole, all of that energy, all of that matter, all of that power would be condensed down, and the gravitational force would be so powerful. They say that in a black hole, if you have hunks of iron the size of Mount Everest, they're crushed down to grains of sand instantly. And my neshama Elyona that's hooked up to the upper world, when I do the wrong thing, creates powerful black holes. You see, when I use this world inappropriately and incorrectly, I create powerful forces in the spiritual world of negativity, of what's known as zehuma, as tuma. Powerful black holes that suck out the kedusha, suck out the holiness. It changes the balance in the upper world, changes my neshama because it pulls it as well. And I've now created a powerful spiritual force on the opposite. What we human beings don't know, what we have no idea about, is the impact of our actions. The reason why the Malachim were terrified to allow Adam to be created is because they saw with clarity. See, I live in a physical body. I see what I see with my physical eyes, but I don't see the upper worlds. But they live in the upper worlds, and they knew it. And because of that, they were so filled with fear that they said to Hashem, don't do it. And they certainly didn't want man to be created. And in fact, when Adam was created, and for whatever which reason he violated Hashem's commandment, he literally destroyed the world. And what's interesting to note is that Derech Hashem explains that it wasn't that Hashem punished Adam and said, now I'm going to introduce death into the world. It wasn't that Adam needed to be punished. It was that he was so makalkel the world. He so damaged the world that now if it could be, Hashem had to revert to plan B. The world cannot reach its state of perfection as it is now. There has to be a new state called death. Then there has to be later a tchias hamesim, and in that new state to then be able to reach the pinnacle, the heights for which creation was made. But the world was so changed that Hashem had to change from plan A to plan B, kaviyachol, if it could be. And if you'd like to understand that in plain, simple terms, the next time you go to a shiva house, imagine you go to a shiva house and you see a bunch of young kids, and you see that their mother passed away, and they're left bereft, empty in the world. And it's a horrible tragedy, a horrible, horrible tragedy. I want you to say the words, Hashem did not want this to be. And if you say those words, you will not be a kofar, you will not be a heretic, because that is correct. Hashem did not want death in the world. Hashem wanted Adam Arishon in Gan Eden. Hashem wanted humanity to be in that state, and in that state be able to perfect themselves, reach the absolute heights of greatness, and live forever in that state. But because Adam ruined the world, because he misused the world, he so damaged the world that death had to be introduced, and the world that we live in now is vastly different than Hashem originally thought it to be. And if you'd like to see the power of one action, just think about that. One man, one act, and for eternity, it's a different world. Humanity, 7 billion people now, generation after generation. But the interesting part is that I too am a human being. I too have a neshama tachtona. I too have a neshama elyona. And I too change upper worlds. I'm not the only man in this world, but I am the only man in my world. And when I leave this physical earth for eternity, what I created is mine. And Hashem put me in a place and put me under circumstances to allow me to build a world that will last forever, to build entire legions of worlds, leagues and leagues, huge, huge groups of worlds. And my neshama elyona is hooked up to that and does just that. And if you'd like to fundamentally understand let's revisit that co-joined twin, the Siamese twin. Because you see, when one likes to drink and both get drunk, in the previous mashal, the results weren't that serious. Because all that happened was, well, one didn't like to drink, and he or she got drunk despite the fact that they didn't want to. But I want you to step it up a moment. Let's imagine that we have this co-joined twins, one likes to drink and the other one doesn't. And when they get drunk, suddenly they get violent. And they start punching things and knocking things down and smashing things, and maybe even deliberately becoming destructive, as in they get into a car and smash it into people and begin doing entire rampages. Could you imagine when they come out of their drunken stupor, what one says to the other? Fool, what did you do? Do you understand? You could have killed us. You could have killed another man. You got us into that rage. What did you do? Why did you do that? You see, when I get drunk with this world, it's not just, well, I got drunk and I rolled on the gutter. When I get drunk with my laziness, my desire, my temptation, whatever it may be, and I change, I damage this world, I damage the upper world. I don't realize it at the time because I'm in my drunken state of anger or jealousy or arrogance. But when I'm in that state, I'm changing upper worlds, creating powerful black holes. And at a certain point, I should come back to my sobriety and say, what did I do? And figure out how to slap the hand of that behemoth very quickly so that he never brings that bottle to my lips again. And the reality is that we are clueless to the effect and the impact of our actions. Would you like to know why that fine fellow Moshe, who was having a bad day, why he deserves Misa? The answer is because he was Machal Shabbos. But Hashem has mercy, and Hashem understands, and it's true, of course Hashem understands. But if you understood what it means to keep Shabbos, Chazal tell us, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos, when a Jew keeps Shabbos, he's a partner with Hashem in creating the world. Meaning to say, Hashem considers it. Hashem created the world in a state that when a Jew keeps Shabbos, it's like he is a partner in the creative act of bringing forth and holding existence where it is. And the opposite. If you violate Shabbos because it's a bad day or whatever the reason, what you've done is so destructive. You may not have realized it. You certainly weren't aware of it. But your neshama elyona, your upper neshama is tied to the upper worlds, and it changes things, create powerful, powerful black holes that are astonishing. And would you like to know why we don't get this? Would you like to know why we totally don't understand it? It's really quite simple. Oliver Sacks was a neurologist. He wrote a number of books, and he studied very interesting cases of unusual things that would happen to people when they had damages to various parts of the brain. One patient, he describes, had a certain damage to a part of the brain that affected their eyesight. When this patient came to visit Dr. Sacks, the patient was completely, totally blind. The interesting part was every mechanism in the eye was fully functional. The optic nerve, the retina, the cornea, everything worked. The lens, everything was fully functional. But because there was a damage to the perceptive part of the brain, the visual cortex, the patient could see nothing. Completely, totally blind. But it wasn't just that he was blind, he had lost all visual memory. See, normally, if a person becomes blind at 30 years of age, he has a lifetime of sight that's in his mind. He can think back of his childhood. Oh, I walked on Main Street, I saw that, so I saw this person, and those memories are still there. And because the visual cortex was so damaged in this person, his entire visual memory was wiped out. But it wasn't just that his visual memory was wiped. It wasn't just that he couldn't see any picture from the past. He didn't even understand what vision meant. When you said to him, do you remember seeing? He didn't know what you were talking about. It had totally been obliterated and eliminated from his conscious mind. That is us. You see, to allow for free will, Hashem had to put that blockage in our brain. If I could ever tap into the upper world and see the impact, the changes in the upper world of my actions, clearly I would not have free will. Are you kidding me? Sin? Violate Hashem's will? Do you know what I'm doing? I'm destroying world. And the opposite. Let me grow, let me accomplish. Are you kidding? Look what I'm doing. And if man had visual memory of what he actually does, forget it. There would be no free will. So to allow man to be able to actually choose, when Hashem put me into this body, it was into this thick, heavy coat, and a sense of amnesia came over me, and I cannot remember that which I once knew, because I began under the Kisei HaKavod. My neshama Elyon certainly sees it on a daily basis because it's there every day. But in my conscious thinking mind, it's blocked, it's not there. I have no visual memory of it. And these concepts are fundamental to understand. You see, Adam Rishon was in a different state. We're not. And we'll never really understand the impact of our actions. And the truth be told, we don't really have to. Our job is to use the world as Hashem wants us to. They say, Shulchan Aruch explains to you what to do. Kabbalah, the Zohar explains to you when you do what you're supposed to do, what do you do? But the truth is, until you've mastered all of Torah Shebeksav, Torah Shebal Peh, until you mastered all of what we know as Nigla, which means basically Kol HaTorah Kula, until you've mastered that, we don't need to know what happens in the upper world. We don't need to know the effects because we're really not going to be able to understand it. But it is important to at least be privy on some level, to at least be vaguely aware, because then we can understand on some level the impact of our actions, the gravity of our actions. We can understand that when the Torah says, if you do this, you're really, really warranted to get Malchus. If you speak Lashon Hara, you should be beaten publicly. There's a technical reason, it's a lav, shem, b'maisa, there's no action. But if not for that technicality, what's worthy to happen to you is you should be taken into a public place, your shirt taken off, and given lashes. A doctor on hand to make sure you don't die, because it is a very, very painful. Come on, all I did was tell a little story. Yeah, you know what you did? You damaged another human being. You damage their reputation. You damage who they are. We don't think of it that way. We don't realize it. But when you read about things like this, you realize that there's a whole other world that we don't focus on. We have to be aware of it. We don't live in that world. We live in the world of Shulchan Aruch. But I think that these chazals are key and essential. When Hashem said to Adam Rishon, pay attention that you don't destroy my world, what he was saying was the entire world is put in a state of flex for you to use. Use it properly and you light up the upper world. How do you do that? Because you're on that elliptical machine. Yes, you're a small man, but you're tied to upper world, and when you pump out your 100 watt an hour, it fuels that nuclear reactor that pumps out 1,000 megawatts, 100 million times what you could ever do. And in fact, Hashem said to Adam Rishon, if you do the opposite, pay attention, you don't destroy my world. Because if you do the opposite, forget it. And in fact, when Adam did the opposite, this very world that was created in a state of flex, created in a state that could either go up or down, he brought it down to the extent that the world had to change. And you have to understand that I'm never going to fully get it because Hashem put me into this body, putting me in a state that I'll never understand it. But I also have to understand that I'm responsible. Hashem forgives in His tshuva, and I have to grow. But more than anything, I have to get control of me. And I have to recognize that it wasn't just that I was put into a place where it's dark and difficult to see the results. I was put with another part of me. I'm a co-joined twin. And this co-joined twin, the other part of me, likes to drink. And its drink might be laziness, its drink might be arrogance, its drink might be desire, but it likes to drink. And the problem is we share the same blood supply. And when we get drunk, it's he and I together. And in that state of drunkenness, I lose all sobriety. I no longer recognize what I'm doing. I no longer care. I feel differently. I think differently. And the only choice is I have to learn to slap his hand way before he gets near that bottle, because if he ever gets us drunk, we're both in great dire trouble. And this understanding allows us on some level to understand the world as Chazal understood it. And I want to close with one last thought. If you go to a retirement community, you'll see a world different than the world that you and I live in. Because while we may earn a lot of money, we may earn a little bit of money, Baruch Hashem, if you have a job, you're okay. But if you're living on a fixed amount of money and the economy goes down, you're in big trouble. And let's even assume you have a lot of money put away. You worked many years and you establish a nice nest egg. But, when things start tanking, well, your $1 million, which was great, if it starts becoming worth half of that and it's no longer generating income, all of a sudden you realize you hopefully have a lot of years to live, not much money left to do it with, and you get a little scared and it's a little frightening. So I want you to imagine that you and I go to Deerfield Beach, a nice community, retirement community down in Florida, and imagine that there are roughly 15,000 Jews there, and imagine that for whatever which reason, all of them invest their entire nest egg, every penny, in you. And here's the game. They trust you. You have a great business idea. And they take all of their money, all their accumulated wealth, and say, it's up to you. We trust you. We know you're brilliant. You have great business acumen. We believe you're going to return our investment in spades. Please do well. Now, when they hand over that money, there's great trepidation because they know that if you blow it, they're eating cat food and they're not too good. But they trust you and you go ahead. And you start your new enterprise and you work and you work and you work and you sleep under your desk because you realize what you're dealing with. And you realize and understand the severity and the gravity. And you work month after month. And after an entire year, you come back to a shareholders meeting in the retirement community and everyone's gathered. And everyone's waiting with bated breath. They know that their future is based on what they're going to hear now. And you stand up and you say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you the state of affairs. The money that you invested with me, I'm happy to tell you I'm going to return to you today 10 times its value. Because the business venture succeeded beyond even my wildest expectation, took off like a rocket, and I'm here to now present you each 10 times the original investment. The cheering, the applause, it'd be incredible. Now, if that sounds far-fetched, you're right. But when I leave this earth, that scene happens. You see, every action that I engaged in created a malach, created a spiritual force. Every action that I engage in changed the world. And when I leave this world, legions and legions, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands will be there cheering, or the opposite, based on what I did. And when you begin thinking about that, you realize life is not so simple. I was given an opportunity to grow and accomplish. Hashem put me in this world, and I was given a tremendous, tremendous chance, this chance called life. but you have to recognize what it means. You have to recognize the opportunity, and you have to recognize the gravity of what you do and what you can accomplish.